Hey guys, tonight we aren't just reading about history, we're dropping right into it. You find yourself standing in the middle of a muddy lane, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke, and, well, less pleasant things. The sun is just a faint promise on the horizon, but roosters are already screaming, and the village is stirring. There's a scratchy wool tunic on your back, and a strange, heavy feeling in your stomach that you recognize as pure, unadulterated hunger. It's the kind of hunger that gnaws, the kind that reminds you that you are a very fragile being in a very unforgiving time. You probably won't survive the week, honestly, but let's see how long you can make it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always so cool to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first morning as a peasant begins not with an alarm clock, but with the distant clang of the manor bell, a sound that cuts through the sleepy quiet. It's still dark, but everyone is moving. You stumble out of the wattle and daub hut you now call home, the low door forcing you to stoop. The air is frigid, and a thin mist hangs over the fields, making the simple act of breathing feel cold and damp. The ground beneath your bare feet, or maybe you were lucky enough to find some worn-out leather shoes, is a mix of hard-packed mud and frozen filth. You pass by other villagers, all of them silent, their faces drawn and focused. No one is smiling. No one is greeting you with a cheerful good morning. This isn't a time for cheer. This is a time for survival. You grab a piece of dry bread from a rough-hewn table inside, a ration that feels like a cruel joke against the emptiness in your stomach, and you begin to trudge toward the fields. The work is relentless. You are a serf, tied to this land and its lord. You don't own anything, not really. Your life, your labor, your family, it all belongs to the manor. The fields are vast, stretching out under the gray sky. You see others already hunched over, their backs to the wind, pulling weeds or preparing the soil. This is the heart of medieval life, the endless cycle of sowing and reaping, a dance with the seasons that determines who eats and who starves. Your tools are simple, a heavy wooden plow pulled by an ox, or perhaps just a hand hoe. You feel every ounce of its weight. Your hands, soft from a life in the future, are quickly becoming calloused and raw. The sun, when it finally breaks through, feels less like a warm embrace and more like a harsh, unblinking eye, illuminating the endless work ahead. It's a lot like a bad office job, but instead of spreadsheets, you have furrows of dirt, and instead of a coffee break, you get to drink some stagnant water from a nearby ditch. The sheer physical toll of this life is shocking. Mainstream historical fact. A peasant in medieval Europe worked, on average, over 300 days a year for their lord, leaving very little time to tend to their own small plot of land. It's no wonder they were so tired. You work until the midday sun is directly overhead. There's no lunch break, just a short pause to eat the rest of your meager ration. You sit with others, not speaking much. The silence isn't awkward, it's just the default. You notice a woman meticulously picking lice from her child's hair. This is a constant battle, you realize. Personal hygiene isn't exactly a priority, not when water is scarce and soap is a luxury you can't even imagine. It's a quirky tidbit you probably never learned in school. The common medieval belief was that bathing was a sign of vanity and could even weaken the body, making you more susceptible to illness. So, you're not just dirty, you're piously dirty. The afternoon bleeds into the evening, the work never ceasing. You feel the first aches in your back, the strain in your legs. You are, in essence, a living machine, fueled by bread and an overwhelming desire to not die. You learn to recognize the subtle changes in the soil, the way the wind whispers coming rain, the precise moment an ox decides it's had enough of your nonsense. The world becomes smaller, more focused. The grand debates of the future, politics, technology, art, seem frivolous. Here, the only debate is whether the harvest will be good enough to get you through the winter. Historians still argue whether the serf's life was one of complete misery, or if the stable social structure provided a certain kind of security. You're inclined to think it was the former, but you can't deny the strange, primitive comfort of knowing your place, however low it is. The sun finally sets, and the chill returns. You gather your tools and begin the slow, painful trudge back to your hut, your body screaming with fatigue. The day is over, but the work is not. The fire needs to be stoked, the small garden plot tended, and your worn tools repaired. There is no rest for the wicked or for the medieval peasant. You are just a cog in a great, grinding wheel, and you feel the weight of centuries of labor on your shoulders. After a day of back-breaking labor in the fields, you are finally back in the village. This isn't a sleepy hamlet with quaint cottages and picket fences you see in movies. It's a dense cluster of huts built from wattle and daub, a mix of woven sticks and mud, with roofs of thick thatch. The structures are low to the ground, almost as if they are huddling against the cold, a visual representation of how close to the earth everyone lives. There are no straight lines, no neat rows. The houses are jumbled together, and the lanes between them are narrow, winding tracks, perpetually muddy and strewn with, well, let's just say a lot of organic matter. The smell is a complex bouquet of wood smoke, wet earth, unwashed bodies, and animal waste. It's a smell that gets into your clothes, your hair, and your very skin. You're starting to think you'll never be able to truly wash it out. The inside of your hut is one single room, a space you share with your entire family. There's a central hearth where a fire constantly burns, its smoke escaping through a hole in the roof, or more often, just lingering in the air, stinging your eyes and coating everything in a layer of soot. There's no furniture to speak of, just a couple of rough-hewn stools and some straw pallets on the floor for sleeping. You've noticed that privacy is an utterly foreign concept here. Everyone eats, sleeps, and lives together. There's an odd comfort to it, a sense of shared fate, but also an overwhelming feeling of being constantly exposed. You realize that the only personal space you have is the space inside your own head, and even that is being slowly filled with the gnawing realities of this new life. Life in the village is a communal effort. The day's work isn't just about farming. It's about building, mending, and simply surviving together. You see a group of women washing clothes in the stream, their knuckles red from the cold. You hear the rhythmic tap-tap of a blacksmith's hammer from the edge of the village. Children, barefoot, and often wearing nothing more than a simple shift, chase chickens or push wooden hoops with sticks. They're not just playing, you realize. They're learning the skills they will need to survive. There's no time for childish things here. A quirky historical tidbit. Historians have found evidence that many medieval villagers owned and kept pigs inside their homes during the cold winter months. This was not only to protect the valuable animals, but also because their body heat helped to warm the small, drafty huts. So, that odd grunting sound you hear at night, that's your piggy roommate. The social structure of the village is as fixed as the stones in the wall. You are a peasant. Above you are the local priest, the reeve, who acts as the Lord's representative. And then, far above, the Lord himself. There is no social mobility. You are born into your station, and you will die in it. This is a tough pill to swallow for someone who comes from a world of endless possibilities and self-reinvention. Here, your identity is not what you do, it's what you were born to be. It's a difficult thought, and it's a strange feeling, this lack of agency, this sense of being a tiny piece in a much larger, unchanging machine. You sit down to a simple meal of pottage, a thick stew made of whatever vegetables are available, maybe some grains, and if you're lucky, a small piece of salted pork. The flavor is bland, but it's warm and it's food. You eat it with a simple wooden spoon, your hands still raw from the day's work. The conversation around the fire is subdued. It's about the weather, about a neighbor's sick child, about a new tax the Lord is imposing. These aren't grand conversations. They are the talk of people whose world is small and whose concerns are immediate. Mainstream historical fact. The average life expectancy for a peasant in the Middle Ages was between 30 and 35 years, a stark reminder of the hardships of this life. But you've also read that many who survived childhood often lived much longer, some into their 60s or 70s. So it wasn't an absolute death sentence. Historians still argue whether the high infant mortality rate skewed these numbers, or if the constant threat of famine and disease made a long life truly a rarity. You're just trying to survive the week. The fire is the heart of the home, a warm, flickering island in a sea of cold and darkness. You watch the flames dance, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. The familiar hum of modern life is gone, replaced by the crackle of the fire, the low murmur of voices, and the distant bark of a dog. There's no television, no phone, no light switch. The world simply fades with the sun as you lay down on your straw mat, the straw rustling uncomfortably beneath you. You listen to the sounds of your family breathing, and you realize that even in this hard, uncomfortable life, there is a strange, quiet rhythm to it. It's the rhythm of a world that is simpler, more direct, and utterly unforgiving. The morning light, what little there is of it, is a cruel alarm. You're already sore from yesterday's toil, your muscles protesting with every movement. But there is no time for protest. Today's work is focused on the harvest, a period of immense importance that dictates the entire village's fate for the coming year. This is the moment when all the backbreaking labor of the past months comes to a head. It's a high-stakes gamble against nature, and you are just one of many who have placed your bets. You trudge to the fields with the rest of the villagers, a silent, determined procession. The air is cool and smells of ripe grain and damp earth. You are handed a sickle, a curved blade with a wooden handle, and you begin to cut. The work is rhythmic and monotonous. Bend over, grab the stalks, cut and bundle. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Your back screams, your knees ache, and the sharp blades of the wheat stalks scratch at your hands and arms, leaving a trail of tiny red welts. But you don't stop. The reeve, the Lord's man, is watching, his posture a constant reminder of the consequences of laziness. You know that if you don't do your share, the entire village suffers. The sheer scale of the harvest is staggering. Field after field of golden grain stretches to the horizon. It's a beautiful sight, but its beauty is purely functional. This isn't a postcard, it's a lifeline. You understand now, in a way you couldn't have before, that every single kernel of grain is a unit of survival. This is the currency of this world, your food, your ability to pay your taxes to the Lord, your family's future. It all rests on the yield of this harvest. Mainstream historical fact. In many parts of medieval Europe, up to 2/3 of a peasant's harvest was owed to the lord of the manor, either in taxes or as rent for the land. This left a precarious amount for the peasant's own sustenance and seed for the next year. It's a constant, fragile balance. As you work, you notice the older peasants. Their movements are slow and deliberate, their backs permanently bowed from years of this same grueling labor. You see a quiet wisdom in their eyes, the kind that comes from a life lived in direct contact with the soil and the seasons. They know things you don't: which way the wind will shift, the exact feel of a ripe head of grain, the telltale signs of a coming blight. This knowledge isn't learned from books. It's passed down through generations of necessity. It's an unspoken language of the land. During a brief pause, you sit down and watch a woman carefully pulling out a few stalks of wheat and setting them aside. This, you learn, is for her family's small personal plot. The grains from the Lord's field are for him, but these are for her. A quirky historical tidbit, a tradition known as gleaning, allowed the poor and landless to follow behind the harvesters and pick up any leftover grain from the fields. It was a practice enshrined in both law and custom, a small but vital way for the most destitute to survive. It's a small kindness in an otherwise harsh world, a gesture you find surprisingly beautiful. The sun begins to set, and the air cools. Your body is a symphony of aches, but there's a strange sense of accomplishment. The stacks of harvested grain stand like sentinels across the field. The reeve looks on, a small smile on his face, a sign that the day's work has been acceptable. You feel a pang of relief, a raw, primal joy that you've done your part and survived another day. You begin the slow walk back to the village, your mind so consumed by physical exhaustion that you can barely think. The transition from work to rest is not an abrupt one. There's no switching off. Even as you walk, you are thinking about tomorrow's tasks. Will it be thrashing? Or will the Lord call for work on the castle walls? The days are long, and a part of you is starting to forget what it feels like to not be tired. Historians still argue whether the concept of a weekend existed in any form for peasants. While Sunday was a day of rest and church, many found that the constant demands of their own small plots meant their labor was truly endless. You are beginning to understand this. You get back to your hut, and the smell of the pottage is a welcome, comforting scent. You've earned it today, not with money, but with sweat and strained muscles. And in this world, that's the only currency that matters. You eat, you sit by the fire, and you fall asleep before the sun has truly set. Your dreams filled with the rhythmic swing of a sickle and the heavy weight of a world built on dirt and labor. After the endless toil in the fields, you are beginning to understand the very fabric of this world. It's not an egalitarian paradise. It's a pyramid, and you are right at the bottom. This social structure, known as feudalism, is the absolute rule of the land. It's not just a political system. It's a way of life, a set of unwritten contracts that bind everyone from the king down to you, the humble peasant. The whole thing is built on a simple exchange: protection for labor. Your lord, the one who owns all this land, is a knight or a baron or some other noble who has sworn loyalty to a greater lord, who in turn has sworn loyalty to the king. In return for his service and fealty, he has been granted this land, or fief. And in return for being allowed to live and farm on this land, you, the serf, owe him everything. You wake up each morning, and the first thought that enters your mind isn't about your own plans, but about the Lord's. What will he demand today? Will you be called to repair the castle walls, to mend a bridge, to clear a new field? Your labor is his property, and a lot of it is unpaid. Mainstream historical fact: a peasant was typically required to work on the Lord's land, known as the domain, for a set number of days each week, often 3, and then on top of that, provide extra labor during key times like the harvest. All of this work was considered a form of rent for the small plot of land you were allowed to farm for your own family's sustenance. It's a bit like a landlord who expects you to do all the landscaping for free. Except if you refuse, you get beaten or starved. There's no court to appeal to, no law that protects you from the whims of the Lord. He is the law. His word is final, and his justice, when it's doled out, is swift and often brutal. You watch a fellow villager get flogged in the village square for trying to steal a handful of grain from the Lord's storehouse. The Lord watches from a small balcony on his manor house, his face impassive. It's a chilling reminder of who holds the power. You realize that your entire existence, your fragile life, hangs on the mood and mercy of this one man. It's a terrifying thought, a kind of constant, low-level anxiety that permeates every aspect of your life. A quirky historical tidbit: some lords were far more lenient than others. Some allowed their serfs to pay a monetary rent instead of labor, a system known as sockage. Others were known for their generosity, providing food during times of famine, or even building a new mill to help their villagers. This created a huge variation in the quality of life for peasants across Europe. But you have no way of knowing what your Lord is like until you are living under his thumb. And you've gotten the impression that yours isn't exactly the generous type. You overhear a group of men grumbling quietly in the village square. They're talking about the new tax on the mill, a levy the Lord has just introduced. The miller, who you know is a hard-working man, has to pay a portion of his earnings to the Lord. So does the blacksmith, the baker, and everyone else who provides a service. This is not just a tax on income, it's a tax on existence. You start to understand that the Lord's wealth isn't just a result of his inheritance, it's a direct result of his ability to siphon off the labor and resources of everyone beneath him. It's a brutal, zero-sum game. Historians still argue whether the serf-lord relationship was a form of slavery or a more complex system of mutual obligation. While you could not be bought and sold like a chattel slave, you were inextricably tied to the land and the lord who owned it. You had no right to leave, and your children inherited your status. But the Lord also had an obligation to protect you from invaders or other threats, and to provide some form of justice. You're not sure which side of the debate you'd fall on. All you know is that you're tired, you're hungry, and you can't leave. And the weight of that truth, of being utterly and completely powerless, is a heavier burden than any plow you've had to push. As the sun sets, casting long shadows across the fields, you feel the cold hand of feudalism on your shoulder, a reminder that you are not your own master. You've come to understand the feudal system, the endless labor, and the brutal realities of the harvest. Now, you get to explore your new home. You're standing inside your wattle and daub hut, and it's less a home and more a shelter from the elements. The walls are a mix of woven sticks and mud, the kind of construction that seems impossibly fragile. But you notice the craftsmanship, the way the sticks are interlaced, creating a surprisingly strong frame. The roof is a thick layer of thatch, a dense, golden blanket of straw that keeps most of the rain out, though a few persistent drips remind you that perfection is not a concept here. The floor is just packed earth, cold and hard beneath your feet. There's a constant fine layer of dust and dirt over everything. A small, square hole in the wall serves as a window, with no glass, just a wooden shutter that you can close to keep out the wind. You realize now why everyone seems to spend so much time outside. The air inside is thick with smoke from the central hearth, a smell that clings to your throat and makes your eyes water. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof, which means a lot of the smoke just lingers, turning the air gray and acrid. A quirky historical tidbit, the phrase, "to keep the wolf from the door," likely originated in the Middle Ages, referring to the practice of building a fire in the hearth not just for warmth, but also to prevent hungry wolves from approaching the door of your home. It's a reminder of just how close to the wild and to danger these people lived. The furniture, if you can even call it that, is a testament to the fact that everything has to be made by hand from whatever is available. A rough table and a couple of stools all made from split logs, sit near the fire. They are lumpy, uneven, and utterly functional. There is no concept of aesthetics here, just pure utility. Your bed is a straw pallet on the floor, which you've already discovered is a haven for fleas and other tiny, biting things. The scratching is a constant, low-level irritation. You're starting to get used to it, which is maybe the most depressing thought of all. As you look around, you realize how few personal possessions you have. A few wooden bowls, a cooking pot, a knife. That's it. There are no books, no art on the walls, no little trinkets or keepsakes. The entire focus of your life is on the bare necessities: food, warmth, and shelter. You realize that in this world, wealth isn't measured in possessions, but in things like a healthy ox, a good harvest, and a family that has enough to eat. Mainstream historical fact: most medieval peasants were illiterate and did not own books. Their stories, knowledge, and history were passed down through oral tradition, in songs, and in the sermons of the local priest. Your world, with its information overload, seems like a dizzying, alien place from this perspective. The wind howls through the gaps in the walls, a constant, mournful sound. The roof creaks and groans. You pull a rough wool blanket over you and try to get warm. The fire is dying down, and the cold is starting to creep in. You think about the houses you've known, with their central heating and insulated walls and multiple rooms, and they seem like something out of a fairy tale. You also think about the things you took for granted, the little comforts, the simple ability to get clean. Here, it is all a struggle. Historians still argue whether the huts of the medieval peasant were a cause of disease, or simply a consequence of the poverty that was the root cause of the illnesses. You're pretty sure it was a bit of both. The constant smoke, the poor sanitation, the proximity of animals, it all creates an environment that is ripe for sickness. As you lie there, listening to the sounds of the night, you hear the low murmur of your family sleeping, the soft rustle of straw, and the distant bark of a dog. This is your life now. Simple, hard, and lived in a world that is at once vast and incredibly small. After days of relentless, monotonous labor, the rhythm of your life is finally broken by a new kind of activity: market day. It's a day that feels like a festival, a rare moment of vibrant chaos and social interaction that stands in stark contrast to the quiet, grueling work of the fields. You walk with a few other villagers toward the nearest town, a small, walled settlement a few hours' walk away. The road is just a muddy track, but the atmosphere is different. There's a lightness in the air, a sense of anticipation. As you approach the town gates, you see the market already in full swing. The square is a sea of people, animals, and goods. There's the lowing of cattle, the bleating of sheep, the chatter of voices, and the sharp cries of vendors hawking their wares. The smells are overwhelming and wonderful. Fresh bread, roasting meat, herbs, and something you can't quite place, but it's a smell of commerce, of possibility. It's a sensory overload that makes you feel more alive than you have in weeks. You see people from other villages, all different from the quiet, serious people you've been living with. You are not here to buy much, if anything. As a peasant, you have very little to offer and even less to buy with, but you are here to trade, to barter for a few necessities. You have a small basket of eggs from the chickens you keep, and maybe a few herbs you foraged from the forest. This is your currency. You watch a farmer haggle fiercely over the price of a sheep, his hands gesturing wildly, his voice rising in anger and then falling in compromise. It's a dance of negotiation that seems to be a form of entertainment as much as a transaction. You're struck by the fact that there is no fixed price for anything. Every single thing is up for debate. Mainstream historical fact: barter was the primary form of exchange in medieval Europe, especially for peasants. Coins were rare, and most transactions involved the direct exchange of goods and services. A blacksmith might be paid in grain for his work. A carpenter might receive a portion of the harvest for building a new shed, and a peasant might trade a pig for a few yards of wool. It was a local, deeply personal economy, built on relationships and trust, or a lack thereof. You approach a stall selling rough-spun wool cloth. You hold out your basket of eggs. The woman behind the stall, her face weathered and her hands stained with dye, looks at your offering, then at you. She scoffs. She wants more. You shake your head. You haggle a bit, using the few words of the local dialect you've picked up. It's an awkward, clumsy conversation, but you feel the thrill of it. Finally, she agrees to a trade, not for the cloth you wanted, but for a small piece of leather to mend your worn-out shoes. You feel a strange sense of victory. You made a deal. You survived a transaction. But the market is not just about commerce. It's about information. This is where you learn what's happening in the wider world, a world that seems impossibly far away from your village. You stand near a group of men and listen as they talk about a new tax the king has levied. You hear whispers of a battle fought in a distant land, of a new lord taking over a neighboring fief. This is the internet of the Middle Ages, you realize, a place where news and gossip travel by word of mouth, distorted and embellished with every telling. You hear a story about a traveling hermit who can supposedly cure any ailment with a special concoction of herbs. You also hear a gruesome tale of a man who was publicly shamed for stealing a turnip. It's a constant flow of information, all of it unfiltered and much of it unreliable. A quirky historical tidbit: the most popular form of entertainment at a medieval market was public punishment. People would gather to watch thieves get put in the stocks, or a scold get placed in a dunking stool. It was a day out for the whole family, a mix of shopping and schadenfreude. You see a man in the stocks, and you try to look away, but your gaze is drawn to the spectacle. You feel a mix of pity and fear, a reminder that the rules of this world are simple and brutal. As the sun begins to dip, the market begins to wind down. The vendors pack up their wares, the crowds thin, and the noise level drops from a roar to a gentle hum. You begin the long walk back, a small piece of leather clutched in your hand. The journey home is different from the journey there. You're tired, your back aches, and the leather feels too small for the long walk you just took to get it. But there's something else, too. You feel a strange sense of connection to the wider world. You are not just a peasant in a small, isolated village. You are part of a larger network, a grand dance of commerce and communication that stretches across the kingdom. Historians still argue whether the limited interaction with the outside world made peasants' lives more peaceful or simply more ignorant of the suffering and progress happening elsewhere. You're starting to believe it's a bit of both. You get back to your hut, and you feel the familiar exhaustion, but this time it's mixed with the faint, lingering scent of market day. You've learned about the back-breaking labor and the grinding social structure. But to understand the medieval mind, you have to understand the church. The church isn't just a building you visit on Sundays. It is the absolute center of your life, the very bedrock of your reality. From birth to death, every major event, every moment of fear, every hope is filtered through the teachings and authority of the clergy. The village church is a simple stone building, older than anyone can remember, its walls pocked and scarred by centuries of rain and wind. Its tower is the tallest point in the village, a constant, silent presence that looms over every field and hut. When the bell tolls, its deep, somber sound echoes across the valley, calling you to prayer, marking the time, and announcing deaths. You've noticed that everyone, from the lowliest peasant to the most powerful lord, kneels before the same altar. In a world defined by stark hierarchies, the church provides the only promise of equality, that in the eyes of God, everyone is a soul to be saved. Your local priest is a man who holds more authority in your daily life than the king himself. He is the one who baptizes your children, marries you, and gives you your last rites. He is the one who interprets the Bible, teaches you the saints' lives, and tells you what is right and wrong. He is the keeper of your salvation. Mainstream historical fact. The church owned a vast amount of land in medieval Europe, often receiving it from nobles as a donation for the salvation of their souls. This made the church a powerful economic force, with its own serfs and peasants who worked the land, contributing to its immense wealth and influence. You go to Mass, held in Latin, a language you don't understand, but you understand the rituals. You understand the power of the incense, the chant of the priests, the flickering of the candles. It's a sensory experience, a spectacle that instills both awe and a primal fear of damnation. The images on the stained glass windows, the carvings in the wood, these are the books for the illiterate. They tell stories of saints and sinners, of heaven and hell, in a way that is vivid and impossible to forget. You're told stories of terrible demons that live just beyond the edge of your sight, waiting to snatch a sinner. And you believe it. Because in this world, without science to explain things, a bad harvest isn't just bad weather, it's divine punishment. A sick child isn't just a sick child, it's the work of the devil. A quirky historical tidbit. The church often levied a tax on its parishioners, called a tithe. This was a mandatory payment of 1/10 of a person's income or produce to the church. It was a huge financial burden for a peasant, but to not pay, it was seen as a grave sin. It's a bit like a double tax, one for the Lord, one for God. And both, you realize, have very different but equally terrifying methods of enforcement. As you walk out of the church after a sermon, you see a man confessing to the priest. His shoulders are shaking, and he looks terrified. You understand that the priest holds a tremendous amount of power because he holds the key to the afterlife. The fear of damnation is a very real, very powerful force in your life. This is not some abstract concept. It's a constant weight on your shoulders, a reminder to be good, to work hard, and to not question the way things are. You've learned that the church also acts as a kind of social safety net, the only one you have. The church might organize a food distribution during a famine, or provide a simple bed for a traveling pilgrim. It's not much, but it's something. You see the priest give a few coins to a beggar, an act of charity that stands in stark contrast to the brutal indifference of the feudal lord. Historians still argue whether the church's vast wealth was a force for good, providing charity and stability, or a force for oppression, siphoning resources from the poor and consolidating its own power. You're inclined to think it's a bit of both. You are a small, fragile boat on a vast and stormy sea, and the church is the lighthouse, its light both a guide and a constant, burning reminder of your destination, either heaven or hell. And for now, you just hope that you can make it through one more day without angering either your Lord or your God. After endless days of field work and the hustle of market day, your stomach, a constant companion in its emptiness, gets a break. Tonight, the village is celebrating a saint's day, and that means a small feast. The whole village gathers in the central square, a rare moment of community, and you almost can't believe it, joy. The air is filled with a different kind of smell, not just smoke and dirt, but the scent of roasting meat and fresh-baked bread. Your stomach growls in anticipation. Food for a peasant isn't about pleasure, it's about fuel. Your daily diet has been a monotonous cycle of pottage, a thick stew made of whatever root vegetables and grains are available, and coarse, dark bread made from rye or barley. Meat is a luxury you rarely see. When you do, it's often from a scavenging animal you've caught yourself, like a rabbit, or it's salted pork that has been sitting for months. Mainstream historical fact: medieval peasants typically ate a diet heavy in grains and vegetables, with meat being a rare treat, often reserved for feast days or after a successful hunt. This diet, while simple, was surprisingly rich in fiber and certain vitamins, though it was often lacking in protein and iron. The result was a common ailment known as the scurvy of the winter, when fresh produce was gone. But tonight, things are different. The scent of roasted pork is almost overwhelming. You watch as a large pig, spit roasted over a fire, is carved up. The skin is crispy, the meat is tender, and you feel your mouth watering. This is a moment of pure, unadulterated pleasure in a life of constant hardship. You are given a large chunk of meat, and a piece of bread that is, for once, not rock hard. You tear into it, savoring every bite. This isn't a meal, it's a communion, a shared moment of relief and gratitude. You've noticed that food here isn't just eaten, it's devoured, consumed with a kind of desperate hunger you've never known before. And then there's the ale. You've heard about it, but now you get to try it. It's not the crisp, fizzy beer you're used to. This is thick, cloudy, and a little sour. It's also very weak, often safer to drink than the village well water, which could be contaminated. Everyone is drinking it, from the oldest man to the smallest child. It's a source of calories, and for a brief time, a source of blurry-eyed happiness. A quirky historical tidbit: in many parts of medieval Europe, it was common for people to drink up to a gallon of ale a day. Since water was often unsafe, this became the primary source of hydration. It was a low-alcohol brew, so you weren't constantly drunk, just perpetually a little tipsy. It's a strange thought, living in a state of constant, low-grade buzz. As the ale flows, so does the conversation. For the first time, people are laughing, telling jokes, and singing songs. The serious, drawn faces you've come to know are replaced by smiles. You see a man playing a simple lute, his fingers moving over the strings, and you realize that music, like food, is a source of simple, primal joy. You learn a new drinking song and find yourself singing along, your voice hoarse and a little off-key. But no one seems to care. It's a brief, beautiful moment of shared humanity. Historians still argue whether the constant threat of hunger made the few moments of abundance all the more precious, or if it simply heightened the subsequent misery when the feasting was over. You're inclined to think it was a mix of both. You are fully aware that this moment is temporary. The food will run out, the ale will be gone, and tomorrow you will be back in the fields, your stomach as empty as it was before. But for now, you don't think about that. You are in the present, your belly full, a song on your lips, and a smile on your face. You feel a strange kind of peace, a fleeting, precious moment of contentment in a life that has so little of it. You fall asleep that night with the taste of roasted pork on your tongue and the distant echo of laughter in your ears. A sweet dream that will be forgotten by the cold reality of morning. After the brief relief of the feast, your daily life continues its familiar rhythm of toil and hunger. But one day, the routine is broken. You are sent to collect firewood from the forest that borders the Lord's land. The forest is a place of mystery and fear, a place your village elders have always warned you about. This isn't a manicured park with gentle walking paths. This is a deep, dark, and wild place, a world apart from the cultivated fields and the muddy village square. As you step into the woods, the air grows colder, and the light from the sun is fractured into 1,000 shimmering shards by the thick canopy of trees. The sounds are different, too. The familiar clatter of village life is gone, replaced by the hoot of an owl, the rustle of unseen animals in the undergrowth, and the whisper of the wind through the leaves. Your senses, which have dulled in the monotonous rhythm of the village, are now on high alert. You keep your head on a swivel, your ears straining for any sign of a threat. The forest is not just a source of wood and food. It is a place of real, tangible danger. You know that wolves live here, and bears. You also know that the Lord's game wardens patrol these woods, and to be caught hunting without permission is a crime punishable by death. You are not here to hunt, but even just to be here feels like a risk. This is the Lord's property, and every stick, every animal, every plant is his. Mainstream historical fact: In many parts of medieval Europe, forests were designated as royal hunting grounds, and peasants were forbidden from hunting or even gathering wood without express permission. Breaking these laws was considered a grave offense, often punished with brutal severity, including mutilation or death. This was a way for the nobility to consolidate their power and control resources. As you gather fallen branches, you come across a small, circular clearing, and in its center, you see a small, moss-covered stone with a strange carving on it. It's not a cross or anything you recognize from the church. It looks like a swirling knot. You feel a chill that has nothing to do with the cold. This, you realize, is the real world of your ancestors, a world of pagan beliefs and old spirits that coexisted, however uncomfortably, with the Christian church. You've heard whispers of the old ways, of wise women who could heal with herbs and rituals that could bring a good harvest. You're told they were evil, the work of the devil. But out here, alone in the woods, you're not so sure. A quirky historical tidbit. Many peasants continued to practice old, pre-Christian folk religions for centuries after the conversion of Europe. These beliefs often revolved around nature spirits, fairies, and the power of ancient sites like old trees or sacred stones. It was a kind of dual faith where people would go to church on Sunday and then quietly leave an offering at a sacred spring on Monday. It was a way of hedging their bets, a way of getting help from both God and the spirits of the land. You hear a twig snap behind you, and your heart leaps into your throat. You turn, ready to run, but it's just a deer, its great, dark eyes watching you for a moment before it turns and disappears into the trees. You feel a wave of relief, but also a new understanding. This forest is full of life, not just danger. It's a place of constant survival, a constant dance between predator and prey, between human and nature. It is a world that is much, much older than the church and the king, and you feel the raw power of it all around you. Historians still argue whether the folklore and superstitions of the medieval period were a sign of the peasants' ignorance or a sophisticated way of understanding a world that was otherwise inexplicable. You are starting to think it was a bit of both. You leave the clearing quickly, your arms full of firewood, and you don't look back. You feel a sense of profound relief when you finally see the fields again, the familiar, open, and ordered world of the village. The fear and the mystery of the forest recede, but they don't disappear. They linger in your mind, a reminder that your world, however small and contained, has a wild, dark heart. You've survived the forest, the market, and the drudgery of the fields. But now, you face a new, more terrifying enemy: sickness. You wake up one morning with a cough that rattles your bones and a fever that makes the world swim. Your head pounds, and your throat feels like you've swallowed hot coals. You are a peasant with a modern understanding of germs and sanitation, and you know this isn't just a simple cold. This is something far more sinister. Your family is concerned, but not surprised. Sickness is a constant companion in this life. You see it everywhere. The child with a runny nose, the older man with a hacking cough, the woman with a rash that won't go away. This is a world without antibiotics, without antiseptic, without even a basic understanding of how diseases are transmitted. Mainstream historical fact: medieval medicine was a mix of religious faith, herbal remedies, and superstition. Doctors, who were usually trained priests or barbers, believed that sickness was caused by an imbalance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, a theory that dated back to ancient Greece. A fever was treated with a cold compress to cool the body, and a cough with a warm poultice to dry it out. It was all theory, with very little practical application. Your family tries to help. Your mother, a woman whose face is a roadmap of a hard life, brings you a steaming bowl of something that smells like crushed herbs and boiled water. It's bitter and tastes like dirt, but she insists you drink it. It's a folk remedy, she tells you, passed down through generations. She puts a warm, wet cloth on your forehead, and the slight cooling sensation is a brief, wonderful relief. You feel a strange mix of gratitude and despair. You know this isn't going to help. You know you need a doctor, but a doctor is a luxury you can't afford, even if one existed in this desolate region. The villagers come to visit, their faces full of concern. They bring small, useless trinkets: a dried root, a bird's feather, a polished stone, believing they have some kind of magical power. It's a poignant and heartbreaking display of their helplessness. You realize that a good harvest might feed the body, but it does nothing for the soul. A quirkier historical tidbit: some of the more adventurous medical practices of the Middle Ages included bloodletting, the belief that by cutting a vein and draining some blood, you could restore the balance of the humors. Another popular remedy for a fever was to place a live chicken on the head of the patient. You're thankful your family hasn't tried either of those. Yet, your illness forces you to stop working. You can't even stand up. The Lord's Reeve comes by, his face a mask of annoyance. He doesn't care that you're sick. He cares that you're not working. He warns your family that if you don't return to the field soon, your small plot of land might be given to another family. The threat hangs in the air, a chilling reminder that your humanity is secondary to your usefulness. Your worth is measured in sweat and labor, and when you can no longer provide those, you are useless. You feel a surge of rage, but it is quickly replaced by a wave of crushing weakness. You are too tired to be angry. As you lie on your straw mat, you hear the muffled sounds of the village, the distant clang of a hammer, the low murmur of voices. You are no longer part of that world. You are suspended in a fever dream, and the lines between reality and hallucination begin to blur. You think about your life before, about the modern medicine you took for granted, the little pills that could cure an infection in a day. It feels like a fantasy. Here, life is a constant, brutal dance with death. Historians still argue whether the high mortality rate in the Middle Ages was due to poor hygiene or a complete lack of medical knowledge. You are now a living example of how the two are inseparable. You are just a patient, a statistic, a fragile boat on a dark and stormy sea. You can only hope that you are strong enough to make it through the night. After the brutal reality of the peasant's life, you are suddenly, jarringly, thrown into another world entirely. One day, You wake up not in a smoky hovel on a straw mat, but on a soft, feather-stuffed mattress in a room filled with light and the scent of expensive incense. You are no longer a peasant. You are a noble, a young boy or girl, a knight in training. This is the world of the privileged, and your journey starts not in a field, but in the hall of a great lord. This is a life of training, of discipline, and of constant preparation for the battlefield. Your education begins not with books, but with service. At the age of 7, you are sent away from your home to serve as a page in the household of a greater noble, a powerful knight. Your duties are not glamorous. You are a servant. You run errands, you wait on tables, you help the ladies of the court get dressed, and you learn the rules of the house. This is a time of humility, a stark contrast to the pampered lives of modern children. You are taught manners, courtesy, and the intricate art of proper etiquette. A quirky historical tidbit. Pages were also responsible for the mundane but important task of helping their lord put on his armor. This required a surprising amount of strength and precision, a very literal knight's aid. As a page, you are also taught basic skills in chivalry, the code of conduct that governs the lives of knights. You are taught how to handle a sword, though for now it's a simple wooden one. You learn how to ride a horse and how to care for it. You listen to the stories of great knights and famous battles, and you begin to understand the honor and glory that comes with a life of warfare. This is a life of purpose, of preparation for a role that is defined by combat and loyalty. At around the age of 14, your life changes again. You become a squire. This is a much more serious role. You are now a direct servant to a knight. You follow him everywhere. You carry his shield, you clean his armor, you polish his weapons, and you help him dress for battle. You are now a part of his life, a kind of apprentice who learns everything by doing. You see the brutal reality of warfare firsthand. You see the blood, the mud, the fear. You are no longer learning about war, you are living it. You are also training more seriously, learning to use a real sword, a mace, and a lance. You spar with other squires and knights, the sound of metal on metal filling the air. This is a life of constant physical exertion, a life that is as demanding in its own way as a peasant's. Mainstream historical fact. A squire's duties included not just training, but also serving their knight in battle, retrieving his weapons, and carrying him from the field if he was wounded. It was a dangerous, high-stakes apprenticeship. As a squire, you are also expected to learn the arts of courtly love, to woo and impress the ladies of the court with poetry, music, and your skills in combat. This is a part of the chivalric code, the idea that a knight is not just a brute, but a cultured and romantic figure. Historians still argue whether courtly love was a genuine expression of affection or a stylized, and often unfulfilled, ritual of the noble class. You're not sure you care, as you're more focused on getting the rust out of your lord's chainmail. You're a servant, but you are also a student. You learn how to read and write, something that the peasant you were could only dream of. You learn about history, about the great kings and battles of the past. Your world is expanding, growing larger with every story you hear and every book you read. You are no longer confined to a single village. You are part of a larger, more ambitious world. As a squire, you are also the knight's most trusted confidant. You hear his secrets, his fears, and his hopes. You learn that even a knight, a symbol of strength and power, is just a man. You are his shadow, his protector, his right-hand man. This is a life of discipline, of service, and of constant learning. The journey from page to squire is a long and arduous one, a slow transformation from a child to a warrior. And for you, it is just the beginning. You've experienced the grueling training of a page and a squire. Now, you get to see the home that all this training protects, the noble's castle. It's not the fairy tale fortress of your imagination, with shining banners and perfect stone walls. It's a cold, imposing structure, a symbol of power, and an utterly unromantic living space. You approach it with your lord, riding through a landscape that feels small and insignificant in its shadow. The first thing you notice is the scale. The castle is immense, a great stone beast crouching on a hill, its walls a testament to centuries of labor and defense. The drawbridge is a series of thick wooden planks, and the gate is an intimidating grid of iron, the portcullis. This isn't just a home, it's a statement. A very loud, very clear statement that says, "Do not mess with me." As you ride through the gates, you enter the outer bailey, a bustling, chaotic space. This is the heart of the manor, the administrative center. You see a blacksmith's forge, a stable filled with the sounds of horses, and the low-slung buildings of the kitchen and the storehouses. It's a beehive of activity, filled with servants, soldiers, and merchants. The air is filled with the scent of wood smoke, horses, and the constant clang of the blacksmith's hammer. This is the world that serves the noble, the unseen machinery that keeps the great stone beast running. You enter the great hall, the central nerve center of the castle. It's a vast, echoing room with a high, vaulted ceiling and a smoky haze from the central fire. The floor is covered in rushes, which you realize are not just for insulation, but also for absorbing the endless mess of food scraps, bones, and whatever else is dropped on the floor. It smells well. It smells like 1,000 years of unwashed rushes. At one end of the hall is a raised dais, where your lord and his family eat and sit in judgment. The rest of the hall is filled with long, trestle tables where the soldiers, squires, and servants eat. It's a loud, bustling, and public place. There's no private dining here. Life in the great hall is a constant performance, a public display of power and status. Mainstream historical fact: the great hall was the most important room in a medieval castle. It was not only used for feasts and gatherings, but also served as a court of law, a sleeping area for servants, and a general workspace. The noble's family might have had their own private chambers, but a large part of their life was still spent in the public eye of the great hall. This was a way of reinforcing their authority and staying connected to the people who served them. Your lord and his family live a life of comfort, but it's a comfort that is relative. The castle walls, while thick, are also incredibly cold and damp. The windows are small slits in the wall, and the wind whistles through them, carrying a perpetual draft. There is no central heating. No cozy nooks with comfortable armchairs. The only warmth comes from the fireplaces, and you're starting to believe that every medieval person's core temperature was just a few degrees lower than a modern person's. The castle is a fortress first and a home second, and it's a constant battle against the elements. A quirky historical tidbit: the phrase, "an Englishman's home is his castle," is quite ironic. In the Middle Ages, castles were not homes in the modern sense. They were more like military barracks with a noble family living in the middle. The life of a noble, while better than a peasant's, was far from what we consider luxurious. The tapestries on the walls were not just for decoration. They were a way of keeping the drafts out and providing a little bit of insulation. You follow your lord to his private chambers, a space that is still grand but more intimate. There's a roaring fire in the hearth, and a large carved bed sits in the corner, with thick wool blankets piled on it. Even here, the walls are cold and the air has a faint chill. Your job is to make sure your lord is comfortable, to bring him food and drink, and to be at his beck and call. You are a shadow, always there, always ready. You see the stress on his face, the weight of responsibility that comes with his power. He has to manage his lands, his people, his soldiers, and his family. He has to make decisions that could mean life or death for hundreds of people. You're starting to see that power in this world is not just about privilege. It's about a crushing burden of responsibility. Historians still argue whether the castle was a symbol of the lord's tyranny or a vital source of protection for the peasants who lived on his land. You've seen the way he rules with an iron fist, but you also know that if an army were to invade, this great stone building would be the only thing standing between you and utter annihilation. It's a mixed bag, a system that is both oppressive and, in its own way, protective. You realize that in this world, there are no simple heroes or villains, just people trying to survive within a system that is as unyielding as the stone walls of the castle you now call home. You've navigated the treacherous waters of the king's court, a world of power and politics. Now, you get to see a different side of royal life, the feast. It's an event of staggering extravagance, a theatrical display of wealth and power that stands in stark contrast to the simple communal meals of the peasants. You are no longer eating a humble pottage by a smoky fire. You are a part of a grand spectacle, a multi-course banquet in a hall so immense that the sounds of conversation and music echo off the stone walls. The great hall is a riot of color and sound. Long tables are laden with silver platters, and the air is filled with the scent of roasted meat, spiced wine, and exotic ingredients. The music is not the simple strumming of a lute you heard in the village, but the complex, layered sound of trumpets, drums, and wind instruments. Jousting tournaments and plays are performed in the center of the hall, with jesters and minstrels providing constant entertainment. This is not just a meal. It is a full sensory experience designed to impress and to demonstrate the king's immense wealth and power. You're a squire, so you are not sitting at the head table. You're standing behind your lord, ready to serve him, and you get to see the food up close. It is a bewildering array of dishes. There are roasted swans, peacocks with their feathers reattached for display, great haunches of venison, and fish from the king's private ponds. The variety is staggering, a testament to the king's control over the land and his ability to command resources. You see platters of candied fruit, intricate pastries, and cheeses of every kind. This is a far cry from the daily bread and pottage you are used to. Mainstream historical fact: medieval banquets were not just about eating. They were a carefully orchestrated display of social hierarchy. The most important people sat at the highest table on a raised platform, while the less important people sat further down the hall. The order in which you were served was also a strict reflection of your rank, a clear and public reminder of your place in the social order. As you stand there, you notice the king and queen at the head table. They are not just eating. They are being served by an army of servants, their every need attended to. There are men whose sole job it is to cut the king's meat, to pour his wine, and to hand him a napkin. They are surrounded by a constant flow of people, all vying for their attention. The king, you realize, is not a man who has a moment of peace. His life is a public performance, a constant act of being a king. A quirky historical tidbit: some of the more exotic dishes at a medieval feast included subtleties, which were elaborate, edible sculptures made of sugar, marzipan, or colored dough. They were often used to tell a story or to make a political statement. You see one now, a miniature castle with tiny knights made of marzipan, and you are amazed by the level of skill and artistry that went into it. It's a completely useless and utterly beautiful thing, a symbol of a life that is so different from the one you knew. You also notice the waste. Food is dropped on the floor and left there. Servants who are not quick enough are shoved aside. You see a man who is clearly drunk pass out under a table, and no one seems to notice or care. It's a world of excess, a stark and brutal contrast to the constant hunger of the peasants. You remember the shared feeling of gratitude you felt during the village feast, the way everyone savored every bite. Here, there is a kind of casual indifference to the food, an assumption that there will always be more. Historians still argue whether the extreme feasting of the royalty was a necessary display of power or a grotesque overindulgence that contributed to the misery of the lower classes. You're inclined to believe it's the latter. You're watching a world that is so far removed from the one you knew, a world of power and privilege that is built on the backs of the tired and hungry. As the feast winds down and the music fades, you are left with a feeling of profound sadness, a sense of the immense gulf between the king and the peasant, a chasm that cannot be bridged. You've seen the life of a peasant, the struggle of a squire, and the cold, powerful reality of a noble's castle. But now, you are being called to the very pinnacle of this world, the king's court. The journey is long and arduous, a procession of knights, soldiers, and servants that snakes across the countryside. As you approach the great city, its walls and spires rising on the horizon, you feel a sense of both awe and terror. This is the heart of the kingdom, the place where all power originates. This is a place of rituals, of unspoken rules, and of secrets that could get you killed if you ever heard them. You enter the king's court, and it is a world of bewildering opulence and strict etiquette. The halls are grander than anything you've seen, filled with nobles dressed in silks and velvet, their jewels sparkling in the light of 1,000 candles. The air is thick with the scent of perfume, roasted meats, and the faint, sweet smell of 1,000 flowers. There are whispers everywhere, a constant, low hum of gossip and intrigue. A single wrong move, a misplaced word, a slight to the wrong person, any of these could be a social death sentence, or a literal one. Your lord, the one you've been serving, is a small fish in a very big pond here. You see him bowing and scraping before powerful dukes and earls, men who command entire armies. You realize that the power you saw in his castle was just a tiny fraction of what exists here. The king is the sun, and everyone else is just a planet orbiting his light. You are now in a world where power is not measured in physical strength, but in political influence, in who you know and what secrets you hold. Mainstream historical fact: the king's court was not a fixed location. It was often peripatetic, moving from one royal castle to another, consuming vast resources and creating a constant logistical nightmare. This movement was a way for the king to assert his authority over his lands and to show his power to the people. Your new life as a squire to a lord who serves the king is a constant lesson in social engineering. You learn the precise way to bow, the exact words to use when addressing a duke, and the subtle gestures that convey respect or contempt. You stand behind your lord, watching and learning, a silent observer in this great game of power. You notice how a glance from the king can make a powerful man tremble, and how a word of praise can fill him with immense pride. The king's power isn't just about his armies, it's about his ability to command with a look, to rule with a whisper. A quirky historical tidbit: the king's daily life was a public spectacle, with nobles and servants often present even during the most intimate moments. The king's waking up, his eating, and even his going to the toilet were often observed by his courtiers. This was a way of reinforcing the idea that the king's body was a public body, a symbol of the kingdom itself. It was a life without privacy, a life lived entirely for the sake of the kingdom. You find this incredibly bizarre and uncomfortable, a far cry from the modern concept of personal space. You begin to hear the stories and the gossip. You hear about plots to assassinate the king, about betrayals, and about secret love affairs. The court is a hotbed of intrigue, a place where no one is truly safe. You also see the king's advisors, the men who truly run the kingdom. They are not warriors, but scholars, priests, and jurists. They are the ones who make the laws, collect the taxes, and manage the vast wealth of the kingdom. You realize that a king's power is only as good as the men who serve him. Historians still argue whether the court was a force for political stability or a constant source of dangerous political rivalries. You are seeing both sides of it. It is a place of order and law, but it is also a place where a single mistake can lead to a coup or a civil war. You are a small, insignificant piece in this great, grinding machine, and you feel the weight of history all around you. You are in a place where lives are made and unmade with a single word. And you realize that your life, which felt so difficult as a peasant, is now filled with a new kind of terror, the terror of a single, powerful man's whim. You stand in the shadows, watching, and you hope that you are invisible. For in this world, being noticed by the king can be a very, very dangerous thing. You've seen the feast and the power of the king, but behind every great ruler is a family. And at the heart of that family is the queen and the royal children. You are now in the private chambers of the queen, a world that is quieter and more intimate than the great hall, but no less political. The queen is not just a wife. She is a figure of immense power in her own right. She is often a foreign princess, brought here to secure an alliance, and her role is to produce an heir and to maintain the social order of the court. You see her surrounded by her ladies-in-waiting, a constant stream of women who serve as her companions, confidants, and spies. The Queen's court is a network of information and influence, a place where a whisper can bring a man to ruin, and a word of praise can make his fortune. The Queen is often a mediator between the king and his nobles, a softening influence, or in some cases, a power-hungry schemer. Her life, you realize, is a constant dance of balancing personal desire with political necessity. Mainstream historical fact: many medieval queens were highly educated, fluent in multiple languages, and skilled in diplomacy. They often ruled as regents when their husbands were away at war, and some, like Eleanor of Aquitaine, were powerful figures who commanded vast lands and armies in their own right. You see the royal children, the young princes and princesses. They are not like the village children you remember, who were running barefoot and covered in dirt. These children are dressed in silks and velvet, their hair meticulously groomed. They are surrounded by tutors and servants, their every need attended to. But you notice something else, too. They are isolated. They are taught from a young age that they are different, that they are destined for greatness, and that their lives are not their own. Their marriages are arranged for political gain. Their education is focused on warfare and politics, and their play is often a preparation for their future roles as rulers. They have everything a peasant could ever want, but they have a complete and total lack of freedom. A quirky historical tidbit: the royal children often had their own miniature versions of everything: miniature suits of armor, miniature bows and arrows, miniature horses, all designed to teach them the skills they would need as adults. You see a young prince, no older than 7, practicing with a small wooden sword, his face set in a grim expression of concentration. He is a child, but he is also a future king, and the weight of that responsibility is already on his shoulders. The Queen's chambers are filled with a different kind of sound than the rest of the castle. The whispers are softer, the laughter is more restrained, and the conversations are more subtle. This is a world of secrets, a place where information is currency, and a person's life can change with a single word. You notice how the ladies-in-waiting hang on to every word the Queen says, their faces a mask of feigned innocence. You realize that even in this seemingly peaceful world, there is a constant, underlying tension, a quiet battle for power and influence. Historians still argue whether the queen's role was to be a silent partner to her husband or a secret power broker. You are seeing both. She is a symbol of the king's power, but she is also a person of immense influence in her own right, with her own network of spies and informants. You realize that a queen's power is often in the shadows, a hidden hand that guides the king and the kingdom. You are a silent observer in this great, intricate game of chess, and you feel the weight of 1,000 years of tradition and expectation. You realize that even a queen, with all her wealth and power, is a person who is defined by her role, a person who is born into a life that is not her own. And in that, you see a strange kind of similarity between her and the peasant you were, a shared lack of freedom. You've seen the court, the feasting, and the silent power of the queen. But a king's ultimate purpose, his greatest test, is war. You are now a king, and you are no longer a spectator. You are the man in charge. The call to arms has gone out. A rival duke, a man who swore fealty to you, but now claims his lands are independent, has openly defied your authority. You cannot let this stand. If he is not crushed, others will follow, and your kingdom will unravel into chaos. This is not about glory, it is about survival. You sit in your war room, a cold, Spartan space filled with maps and the low murmur of your advisors. The opulence of the court is gone, replaced by the grim reality of military strategy. You are no longer just a figurehead. You are a commander-in-chief, a man whose decisions will lead to the death of thousands. You have sent out the summons, and your knights, those men who swore loyalty to you, are gathering their forces. Their loyalty is not a given. It is a fragile thing, built on a complex web of promises, threats, and shared interests. You know that at any moment, one of them could betray you and side with the enemy. The tension is a constant, gnawing presence. You have to think about logistics, about things you never imagined. How do you feed an army of thousands of men and their horses? How do you get them across a muddy, unforgiving landscape? How do you pay them? Mainstream historical fact: medieval armies were not standing armies. They were raised through the feudal system, where lords were required to provide a certain number of knights and soldiers to their king. This system was often inefficient, and kings relied on mercenaries, professional soldiers who fought for pay, to supplement their forces. This made war incredibly expensive and a constant drain on the kingdom's treasury. You realize now that every coin collected in taxes, every peasant's labor, is ultimately a resource for this war. The march is a brutal affair. The roads are a mess of mud and filth, and the knights and soldiers are a long, slow procession. You ride at the head of your army, but you are not a romantic knight on a shining horse. You are a strategist, a leader, a man who has to worry about supply lines and morale. You see the faces of your soldiers, most of them young men who have never seen battle. You know that many of them will not return home. You feel the crushing weight of that responsibility. You are not just a king, you are their last hope. You arrive at the Duke's castle, a great stone fortress that seems to mock you from its perch on a hill. A siege is a different kind of war. It's not a grand, glorious battle. It's a slow, grinding process of starvation and attrition. You order your men to build siege engines, catapults that can hurl great stones at the walls, and siege towers that can bring your men to the top of the ramparts. The work is slow and dangerous, and you see men fall every day, crushed by falling stones or hit by arrows from the castle walls. A quirky historical tidbit: during a long siege, the defenders of a castle would sometimes resort to psychological warfare. They would throw down fresh loaves of bread or joints of meat to mock the besiegers, who were often starving and living on meager rations. It was a cruel mind game, a reminder of the futility of their task. As the days turn into weeks, you feel the pressure mounting. Your army is restless, and your resources are running low. You send out men to raid the surrounding villages for food, a decision that you know will bring misery and suffering to the peasants who live there. But you have no choice. Your army must be fed. You are no longer the benevolent ruler you were in the court. You are a hard, pragmatic man who will do whatever it takes to win. You realize that a king's greatest enemy is not his rival, but his own conscience. Historians still argue whether the prolonged sieges of the Middle Ages were a more humane form of warfare than a pitched battle, or simply a slow, agonizing process of death and destruction. You are now seeing it firsthand, and you are starting to believe it's the latter. You stand on a hill, watching the great stone walls of the castle, and you know that there are people in there, men, women, and children, who are starving and afraid. You are the cause of their suffering. And you realize that power, in its most pure form, is the ability to inflict suffering on others. You are a king, and you are winning this war, but a part of you is starting to feel like you are losing your soul. You've won the siege, but the victory feels hollow. The Duke surrendered, but the war has left your kingdom poorer, your treasury empty, and your nobles restless. Your power, you're learning, is both immense and incredibly fragile. It is in this moment of weakness that a new and terrifying enemy emerges, not an army, but an idea. A group of your most powerful barons, led by a man named Stephen, has approached you with a document. They call it the Magna Carta, and it is, you realize, an assault on your very soul. You are a king, and your authority, you believe, comes from God. You are above the law. But this document, this parchment covered in ink, says otherwise. It says that you, the king, are not above the law. It says that you have to follow a set of rules, rules that are decided not just by you, but by the barons. They demand rights. They demand a say in how the kingdom is run, and they demand that you stop levying taxes and seizing property without their consent. Mainstream historical fact. The Magna Carta, signed by King John of England in 1215, was a foundational document of Western law. It was a list of demands from the rebellious barons who were fed up with the king's arbitrary rule and heavy taxation. While it was not a document that gave rights to the common people, it was a crucial step in the long, slow march toward constitutional law, and the idea of a king being subject to the law. You read the document, and a rage begins to burn in your chest. This is not just a demand. It is an insult. It's a fundamental challenge to the way you have always ruled. You are a king, and you are supposed to be absolute. These men, your own subjects, are telling you what you can and cannot do. You feel a sense of profound betrayal. You have bled for them. You have led them in battle. And now they turn on you. You want to refuse, to order them all executed, but you can't. Your army is exhausted. Your treasury is empty. And you are surrounded by men who are no longer loyal. You have to sign it. You have to swallow your pride and sign a document that will fundamentally change the nature of your power. A quirky historical tidbit: the Magna Carta was not a one-and-done deal. King John tried to have it annulled by the Pope almost immediately after he signed it, and it was reissued and revised multiple times in the following decades. It was more of a negotiation than a final settlement, a symbol of the constant tension between a king's power and his subjects' demands. You sign the document, your hand trembling with anger and a strange, unfamiliar fear. You are no longer an absolute monarch. You are a king who has been put in a box. You are bound by a contract, and you are now subject to the same laws that govern your subjects. You feel a strange sense of loss, a kind of death. The world you knew, the world where a king's word was law, is gone. It has been replaced by a new, more complicated world, a world where you have to negotiate, to compromise, and to be held accountable. Historians still argue whether the Magna Carta was a selfish grab for power by the barons, or a genuine step toward a more just society. You're inclined to think it was a bit of both. The barons were looking out for their own interests, but in doing so, they created a legal precedent that would, centuries later, be used to grant rights to all people. You are a king, and you have lost some of your power, but you have also, in a strange, unlooked-for way, created a better world. You stand in your court, looking at the barons, and you know that you have been defeated, not by an army, but by a piece of parchment. And that, you realize, is the most terrifying defeat of all. You've seen the power struggles of kings and nobles, the grand games of war and law. But you've forgotten something fundamental. You've forgotten the peasant. And one day, the peasant stops forgetting. One day, the weight of 1,000 years of hunger, of labor, and of oppression becomes too much to bear. And the peasants rise up. You are no longer a king or a squire. You are a peasant again, but a different kind. You are an angry peasant. You are no longer a passive observer of history. You are making it. The news travels through the village like wildfire. The king, you hear, has imposed a new tax, a brutal and unfair levy known as the poll tax. It is a tax on every single person, rich or poor, a tax that you cannot afford. You've been paying taxes for your land, for the mill, for the blacksmith, and now this. It is the final straw. A fire, a slow-burning rage, has been smoldering in the hearts of the common people, and this tax is the spark that lights it. You see a man, a blacksmith known for his quiet demeanor, now shouting in the village square, his face red with fury. He's talking about a man named Wat Tyler and a preacher named John Ball. Men who are telling the people that they are not animals, that they are human beings, and that they should be free. You join the growing crowd, a great, swelling tide of humanity that is moving toward London. The people are not organized soldiers. They are farmers, artisans, and laborers, armed with scythes, hoes, and whatever else they can get their hands on. There is a terrifying energy in the air, a mix of fear and exhilaration. You are no longer alone. You are a part of something vast and powerful, a great, living force that is moving with a single purpose. Mainstream historical fact: the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, led by Wat Tyler and other key figures, was a major uprising in English history. The rebels marched on London, demanding an end to the poll tax, the abolition of serfdom, and a more just legal system. It was a massive movement that struck a deep fear into the hearts of the English nobility. You feel a profound sense of justice. You are not just a peasant, you are a man with a cause. You are marching for your family, for your freedom, and for the promise of a better life. You pass by villages and towns, and you see more people joining the great, swelling tide. The numbers are staggering. You are an unstoppable force. You feel a sense of camaraderie with the people around you, a shared sense of purpose that transcends the small village rivalries and the old feuds. You are all just peasants, and you are all united in your rage. You enter London, and the city is a scene of chaos. The city gates were open, and the rebels pour in, a living river of humanity. You see the rich, well-dressed people of the city run in fear. You see the burning of houses, the looting of treasures, the execution of officials who were hated for their cruelty. You are a part of this, a small piece of a great, terrible storm. You feel a strange mix of emotions, a sense of righteous anger, a feeling of wild, uncontrollable freedom, and a deep-seated fear of what you are becoming. A quirky historical tidbit: during the revolt, the rebels did not harm many foreign merchants, but they targeted and killed many Flemish weavers who were living in London. This was not because of a hatred of foreigners, but because the English weavers saw the Flemings as a source of competition. It was a class struggle that turned into a local economic one, a reminder that even in a great revolt, the mundane, everyday hatreds of the past were still present. You are in London. You are in the heart of the kingdom. And you get to meet the king, a young King Richard II, who rides out to meet the rebels. He is a boy, no older than 15, and he is terrified. He promises to listen. He promises to give you what you want. You see the hope in the faces of the people around you, the belief that they can, for a moment, change the world. Wat Tyler, a man of immense charisma and power, speaks to the king, and you hear him demand the impossible. He demands an end to serfdom, an end to the feudal system, and an end to the tyranny of the nobles. Historians still argue whether the Peasants' Revolt was a genuine attempt to create a more egalitarian society, or if it was a spontaneous outburst of anger with no real political goals. You're inclined to think it was both. It was a desperate cry from the people who had nothing to lose, but it was also a moment of immense political possibility, a fleeting, beautiful moment when the old order was on the verge of collapse. You watch as Wat Tyler is murdered by one of the king's men, his death plunging the rebels into chaos. The king, a boy who just promised to be a good ruler, now uses the chaos to his advantage, ordering his soldiers to kill the rebels. You are no longer a part of a great, unstoppable force. You are just a peasant again, running for your life. The revolt is over, and it has been crushed. But a part of you, a part of everyone who was there, has been changed. You know now that the old order is not invincible, that a king can be afraid, and that even the smallest, most insignificant person can rise up and change the world, even if just for a moment. You walk back to your village, your spirit broken, but not your will. The future is uncertain, but for the first time, you are no longer just surviving. You are fighting for something, and that, you realize, is the most important thing of all. The fire of the peasants' revolt has been extinguished, but the kingdom is still simmering. You are no longer a peasant or a king, but a neutral observer, a ghost moving through the landscape, a silent witness to what is to come. And what is to come is the great equalizer, a force that does not care about your rank, your wealth, or your power. A force that will forever change the relationship between peasant and king. You feel it in the air, a sense of dread that is not from war, but from something invisible, something terrible and unseen. You hear the first whispers of it, a disease that is traveling from the east, a plague that is leaving a trail of death in its wake. It is known as the Black Death, and it is here. You are in a crowded, dirty port city, a place where 1,000 people are crammed into a few square blocks. The streets are a maze of mud, filth, and human waste. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and the stench of decay. You see a man on a dock with strange, black boils on his body. He is groaning in pain, and a crowd has gathered around him. A priest is trying to pray over him, but you can see the fear in his eyes. A man from a ship, a merchant from a foreign land, is yelling at the crowd to move away, but they don't listen. They are too curious, too terrified to move, and you know, with a chilling certainty, that it has already begun. The plague spreads with an impossible speed. It is a slow-moving but relentless wave of death that washes over the kingdom. It is a terrifying, gruesome death. You see the victims first get a high fever, then the black boils, called buboes, that swell in their armpits and groin. The pain is unimaginable. And then death, often within a few days. You see entire families wiped out in a week. The streets are filled with the moans of the dying and the cries of the grieving. It's a surreal, nightmarish landscape where the living are outnumbered by the dead. Mainstream historical fact: the Black Death, a pandemic of the bubonic plague, arrived in Europe in the mid-14th century and killed an estimated 30 to 50% of the continent's population. It was a demographic catastrophe that had a profound and lasting impact on the social, economic, and political structures of the time. The sheer scale of the death was unimaginable to the people who lived through it. You see the peasants, the people you once were, die in droves. Their lack of sanitation, their crowded living conditions, and their already weakened bodies make them easy prey for the disease. You see the gravediggers, their faces covered with a cloth, their bodies shaking with fear as they pile the dead into mass graves. You see the churches, once full of people, now empty, as priests flee in terror. The social order is collapsing. The rules that governed this world, the feudal system, the power of the king, The authority of the church, all of it, is meaningless in the face of this new, terrifying enemy. A quirky historical tidbit: the common belief at the time was that the plague was a punishment from God for the sins of humanity. People would form groups of flagellants and walk from town to town, publicly whipping themselves to atone for their sins and to beg for God's mercy. You see a group of them now, their backs bloody and their faces a mask of fanatical devotion. It is a heartbreaking display of people's desperate attempt to make sense of a world that no longer makes any sense. You also see the rich and the powerful flee the cities, abandoning their castles and their people for the safety of the countryside. They believe that they are immune, that their wealth and their status will protect them, but the plague does not care about a man's title. You hear whispers of a lord who fled to his country, estate, only to find that the plague had already arrived there, brought by a servant who had traveled with him. The plague is a great equalizer, a silent, creeping terror that brings a king down to the level of a peasant. Historians still argue whether the Black Death was a curse or a blessing in disguise. While it brought unimaginable suffering, it also set the stage for a new kind of world. The old feudal system, which was based on a vast number of peasants and a small number of lords, was now irrevocably broken. The labor shortage that would follow would give the common people a power they had never had before. But for now, you only see the suffering. You see the death. You are a silent ghost in a world of mourning, and you feel the weight of 1,000,000 unseen souls around you. The Black Death has swept through the kingdom, a grim reaper with a scythe that cuts through peasant and king alike. You have seen the horrifying physical reality of it, the boils, the fever, the agonizing death. But now you are a ghost in the landscape, observing the strange, surreal world of medieval medicine as it tries to combat this invisible enemy. It is a world of superstition, ignorance, and a desperate, frantic energy. You walk through a town, and you see a strange figure in the street. It is a doctor, but not like any doctor you have ever seen. He is wearing a long, dark coat, a wide-brimmed hat, and a mask with a long, beak-like nose. The mask is filled with herbs and spices, a primitive attempt to filter the air and ward off the bad smells that were believed to carry the disease. In his hand, he holds a long stick, which he uses to prod and poke the sick, a way of examining them without getting too close. He is a terrifying, almost comical figure, a symbol of a world that is trying to fight a war it cannot possibly win. Mainstream historical fact: plague doctors, with their distinctive beak-like masks, were a real, if often unhelpful, part of medieval medicine. They were often inexperienced and a last resort for the sick, but their presence was a sign that the city was taking the plague seriously, or at least trying to. You see a group of people, their faces pale with fear, running a rat with a string tied to its tail through the streets. They are trying to chase the plague away. A desperate attempt to use magic against a disease they don't understand. You see a woman wearing a bag of garlic around her neck, believing that the scent will ward off the evil spirits of the disease. You see a man throwing a bucket of water on a house, believing that it will cleanse the air of the sickness. Every single one of them is trying to do something, anything, to make sense of the chaos and to regain a sense of control. A quirky historical tidbit. A popular remedy for the plague was to rub a live chicken whose feathers had been plucked from its backside on the buboes. The belief was that the chicken would absorb the sickness from the body. It's a disgusting and obviously ineffective remedy, but it's a perfect example of how people were willing to try anything, no matter how strange, to survive. You also see the priests, the men who once held so much power, now completely lost. Their prayers seem to have no effect. Their rituals seem to have no power. They are just as sick and just as dead as the peasants they are trying to save. The authority of the church, which was built on the promise of salvation and divine mercy, is now on shaky ground. If God is merciful, why is he allowing this to happen? The question is on everyone's lips, and no one has an answer. The church, in a way, is a victim of the plague, too. You see the doctors, the men who were supposed to have the answers, now just as terrified and lost as everyone else. Their theories of humors and bad air are useless against a disease that is killing everyone, from the lowliest peasant to the most powerful noble. The world's knowledge, its accumulated wisdom, is failing. It's a humbling and terrifying thought. Historians still argue whether the medical practices of the Middle Ages were a sign of the people's ignorance or a testament to their resilience in the face of the inexplicable. You are seeing both. You see the foolishness of the rituals, the uselessness of the remedies, but you also see the desperate human need to do something, to not just stand by and watch as the world falls apart. You are a silent ghost, a witness to a world that is in the throes of a grand, terrible, and utterly hopeless battle against an invisible enemy. And you know, with a chilling certainty, that the death count is only going to get higher. The Black Death has come and gone, leaving a trail of death and desolation in its wake. But as the dust settles, you, the ghost in the machine, begin to see the profound and lasting impact it has had on the kingdom, and more importantly, on the relationship between peasant and king. The plague, in its cruel, indiscriminate way, has done something that the peasants' revolt could only dream of. It has fundamentally altered the balance of power. You walk through the countryside, and you notice the fields that have gone fallow. The villages that were once bustling with life are now eerily silent. The death toll has been staggering. You see a handful of peasants trying to tend to a field that was once worked by 50 men. They are fewer in number, but they are also stronger. They have survived. And for the first time in centuries, they are no longer an abundant, cheap commodity. They are now a rare and valuable resource. The immediate effect is a massive labor shortage. With so many peasants dead, the lords are desperate for workers. They are offering higher wages, better living conditions, and even, in some cases, the freedom to move from one manor to another. The old feudal system, which was based on the absolute control of the lord over his serfs, is now crumbling. The peasants, who were once tied to the land, are now negotiating. They have a new kind of power, a power that comes not from a sword, but from their scarcity. Mainstream historical fact. The Black Death created a massive labor shortage in medieval Europe. This led to a rise in wages for peasants and a decline in the power of the feudal lords. The old system of serfdom began to break down as peasants were able to demand better terms for their labor. You see a peasant, a man you remember as being completely subservient to his lord, now standing with his hands on his hips, arguing over his wages. The lord, a man who would have once had him flogged for such insolence, is listening. He is haggling, yes, but he is also compromising. The power dynamic has shifted. A quirky historical tidbit: the English Parliament, in a desperate attempt to stop the rise in wages, passed the Statute of Laborers in 1351. The law decreed that all wages should be frozen at pre-plague levels, and that all able-bodied men must work. But the law was largely ineffective, as the market forces of supply and demand were far more powerful than any law the king could create. You also see the impact of the plague on the nobility. Many lords have lost their entire families. Their lands, which were once worked by a vast number of peasants, are now empty. They have to sell off their lands or rent them out for a fixed price, a system that would one day evolve into the concept of a landlord and a tenant farmer. The old way of life, where a lord's wealth was measured by the number of peasants who worked for him, is now gone. The king is also a victim of this shift. He has lost a significant portion of his tax base. His army, which was once raised through the feudal system, is now much smaller and more expensive to maintain. He is a king of a kingdom that has been fundamentally changed, and he has to adapt to a new world where his power is not absolute. He has to negotiate with his lords, and he has to contend with a newly empowered class of peasants. Historians still argue whether the Black Death was the single most important event in the end of feudalism. You're seeing the evidence firsthand, and you are starting to believe that it was. The plague, in its brutal, terrifying way, was a catalyst, a force that accelerated a process that would have taken centuries. It was a great, terrible shock that shook the very foundations of the kingdom, and in its wake, a new world, a world where the peasant had a voice and the king had to listen, was slowly, painfully, and gloriously born. You are a silent witness to the end of an era. The Black Death, in its brutal, terrifying way, has broken the world you knew. But now, you, the ghost, get to watch the slow, painful, and often confusing process of a new world being born from the ashes. The old order is gone, but the king and the nobility, the people who were once at the top of the pyramid, are still trying to hold on to their power. Their struggle to maintain control in a world that has been fundamentally changed is a strange and often sad spectacle. You see the king and his parliament, a group of powerful men who are trying to create new laws to deal with the labor shortage. They pass the Statute of Laborers, a desperate attempt to freeze wages at pre-plague levels, but the peasants, who are now fewer in number and more valuable than ever, simply ignore it. You see a peasant farmer, a man who once would have been flogged for disobedience, now openly demanding a higher wage from his lord. When the lord refuses, the peasant simply leaves, walking to the next manor where he knows he can get a better deal. The lord, who once had absolute power over his serfs, is now powerless to stop him. Mainstream historical fact: the labor shortage following the Black Death created a kind of bidding war for peasant labor. Lords, desperate to have their land worked, would offer higher wages and better conditions, which in turn forced other lords to do the same. This system, which was based on a free market, was in direct opposition to the old feudal order. The king and his nobles, in their panic, also resort to violence. They try to enforce the old laws to keep the peasants tied to the land, but it is a losing battle. You see them burn down a peasant's house, a futile attempt to make an example of a man who left. But the man is gone. He is in the next village, working for a higher wage. And the lord who burned his house is now a lord with less land and less power. A quirky historical tidbit: some desperate lords would even offer their peasants land of their own, a complete reversal of the old system. They would give a peasant a small plot of land to farm for himself in exchange for a set rent. This system of renting, which was once a privilege, was now a necessity. It was the first step toward the kind of land ownership that would one day be common. You see the slow, painful death of the feudal system. The old, rigid social structure, which was once as unyielding as the stone walls of a castle, is now crumbling. The peasants are no longer just a mass of anonymous laborers. They are now individuals with a name and a price. They have a new kind of power, a power that comes not from a sword, but from the simple, brutal fact of their scarcity. The king is still a king, and the nobles are still nobles, but their power is no longer absolute. They are now, for the first time, in a kind of negotiation with the people they once ruled with an iron fist. Historians still argue whether the peasants' newfound power was a permanent change, or just a temporary one that would fade with time. You're seeing that it's a bit of both. The old system is gone forever, but the new one is still being born, and it's a slow and difficult process. You see the resistance from the nobles, the desperate attempts to hold on to the past, but you also see the new, more confident peasants, the men and women who have a taste of freedom and are not willing to give it up. You are a silent witness to a great, slow-moving war, a war that is not fought with swords and arrows, but with wages and land. And you know, with a chilling certainty, that the peasant is winning. The world has been remade, but the king and the peasant are still fighting over the scraps. You, the ghost, have seen the power shift from the nobility to the common man, but you also see that it is a power that is still fragile, still contested. You are now a peasant again, but a new kind of peasant, a man who has a choice. You have left your lord's manor, a dangerous act that would have once led to your death, and you have found a new lord, a man who has promised you a higher wage and a better life. This is the new reality. You are in a new village, a new place to call home. The people here are from different places, with different accents, a testament to the new mobility of the peasant class. You are not a serf, tied to the land. You are a free man, a farmer who is renting his land, a person who is selling his labor for a wage. You feel a sense of freedom you have never known before. Mainstream historical fact: the post-plague labor shortage and the decline of serfdom led to a new class of free peasants who could move from one place to another and sell their labor to the highest bidder. This was a radical change that was the beginning of the end for the old feudal system. But freedom comes at a price. Your new lord is not a benevolent patriarch. He is a landlord, and he is a businessman. He wants to get the most work out of you for the least amount of pay. You have to haggle with him to negotiate your terms. It is a new kind of struggle, a final battle for land and for your freedom. You realize that you have traded the chains of the feudal system for the subtle and often invisible chains of the free market. You are no longer owned, but you are still a commodity. A quirky historical tidbit: the end of serfdom did not happen overnight. In many parts of Europe, it was a slow, drawn-out process that lasted for centuries. In some places, the nobility, in a last-ditch effort to keep the old system, resorted to violence, burning down the homes of peasants who tried to leave. It was a desperate and ultimately futile attempt to hold on to the past. You are in a new world, a world where your worth is no longer measured by your birth, but by your ability to work. You see a man, an artisan who makes shoes, a person who would have once been at the bottom of the social hierarchy, now a man of some wealth, a man who can afford a decent home and good food. His skill is now in high demand, and he is able to command a high price for his labor. This is the new reality, a world where a person's worth is measured by their skill and their talent, not their birthright. The king and his nobles, who once ruled with an iron fist, are now in a new, more complicated world. They are still powerful, but they are no longer absolute. They have to deal with a new class of people, the merchants and artisans, men and women who have a voice and a power that comes from their wealth. They also have to contend with the free peasants, the people who are no longer their subjects, but their employees. It is a slow, difficult, and painful process, but you are seeing the old order slowly, irrevocably, dying. Historians still argue whether the end of feudalism was a result of the Black Death, or if it was a process that would have happened anyway. You're inclined to believe that the plague was a catalyst, a force that accelerated a process that would have taken centuries. It was a brutal, terrifying shock that broke the old world and created a new one. You are a witness to the final battle for freedom, a battle that is not fought with swords and arrows, but with wages and land. And you know, with a chilling certainty, that the peasant is winning. The old world is gone, and a new one, a world of possibility and struggle, has been born. You have seen the final battle for land and freedom, a war fought not with swords, but with the silent, irresistible force of scarcity and choice. The old world is gone, and a new one is being born from its ashes. But what of the peasant? What of the person who spent their entire life in the shadows, their name unwritten, their story untold? You, the ghost, have witnessed their struggle, their suffering, and their eventual triumph. You are now seeing their legacy. It is not carved in stone or written on parchment. It is whispered in song, passed down from generation to generation. A story that is told not in books, but in the low, mournful, and ultimately triumphant melody of the people. You walk through a village, and you hear a woman singing a lullaby to her child. It's a simple, rhythmic song, but you catch a few of the words. It's not about a king or a knight. It's about a man who stands up to his lord, a man who leaves his manor for a better life. It is a story of a hero, but a new kind of hero. A quiet, humble hero who fights not with a sword, but with his feet. This is the new history, a history that is no longer about the great and the powerful, but about the small and the forgotten. Mainstream historical fact. The stories and songs of the peasantry were a form of oral history, a way for them to preserve their culture and their stories in a world where they were largely illiterate. The folk songs of the post-plague era often told tales of defiance and social mobility, a subtle way of celebrating their newfound freedom. You also see the new kind of work that has emerged. The free peasants, who are no longer tied to the land, are starting to organize themselves. They are forming guilds, small groups of people who work together to get better wages and to protect their rights. You see a group of blacksmiths, men who were once isolated and alone, now meeting together in a small room, their faces serious and focused. They are talking about a new contract, a new set of rules that they will present to the Lord. They have a new kind of power, a power that comes from unity. They are a force to be reckoned with. A quirky historical tidbit. Some of the more radical peasants, the ones who had been a part of the peasants' revolt, would often meet in secret in the woods, sharing stories and songs of defiance. They would talk about a world where there would be no king, no lord, no priest, a world where every man would be equal. These were not just fantasies. They were a dream of a world that they knew was possible. They would sing a song about a man who was flogged for stealing a loaf of bread, but who came back, a silent ghost, to haunt the Lord and his family. It was a story of a silent, powerful revenge. The king and his nobles, who are still trying to hold on to the past, are now terrified. They are no longer just afraid of an army. They are afraid of a song. They are afraid of an idea that is being passed down from mother to child, an idea that is spreading like a wildfire. They pass laws to make it illegal to organize, to sing songs of defiance, but it is a losing battle. You cannot legislate against an idea. You cannot kill a song. You see an old man, a man who has lived through the plague, through the revolt, and through the slow, painful end of feudalism. He is a man who was a serf, a man who was once owned by his lord. He is now a free man, a man who owns his own small piece of land, a man who has a voice. He is sitting on a stool outside his hut, whittling a piece of wood, and you see the quiet pride in his eyes. He is a testament to the fact that even the smallest, most insignificant person can change the world. He is a living legacy. Historians still argue whether the legacy of the peasant was one of quiet resilience or one of open rebellion. You are seeing both. You are seeing the silent, powerful way they endured the hardships of their life, the way they survived famine and plague, and the way they held on to their humanity in a world that saw them as little more than animals. But you are also seeing the way they fought back, the way they rebelled, the way they stood up and said, "We are human. We are not animals. We are free." The legacy of the peasant is a complicated one, a mix of quiet endurance and wild, beautiful rage. And it is a legacy that will be whispered in song for 1,000 years to come. You've seen the peasant's story, a legacy whispered in song and carried in the blood of a new, freer generation. Now, let's consider the other side of the coin. What of the king? What is his legacy, and how is it remembered? It is not whispered in song, but carved in stone. It is not passed down by the people, but written by the powerful. You, the ghost, have witnessed the king's struggles, his wars, his political battles, and his terrifying encounter with the Magna Carta and the Black Death. Now you are seeing his final legacy, a testament to his power and his vulnerability. You are standing in a great cathedral, a building so immense and beautiful that it feels like it touches the heavens. This is a monument to the king's power, a place where he will be laid to rest. The walls are covered in intricate carvings. The stained glass windows depict scenes of his victories, and his tomb is a magnificent effigy of a man in full armor, his hands clasped in prayer. He is a king, and his legacy is a physical thing, a work of art and a testament to his reign. Mainstream historical fact: medieval kings and nobles often commissioned elaborate tombs and chapels, not just as a final resting place, but as a way to project their power and secure their place in history. These monuments were a visual narrative of their life, their triumphs, and their devotion to God. But you know the truth. You know that this beautiful tomb is a symbol of a power that was often fragile, a life that was often filled with fear and uncertainty. You remember the young king, a boy who faced a furious mob of peasants, a man who was forced to sign away his power, a person who was ultimately humbled by a tiny, invisible plague. His legacy, you realize, is a story that is told by the winners. It is a curated narrative, a beautiful lie that hides the truth of a life that was often brutal and terrifying. A quirky historical tidbit: some medieval kings, in a move that was both an act of piety and a clever political maneuver, would sometimes be buried in the robes of a monk. This was a way of showing their humility, their devotion to God, and their hope that they would be forgiven for the sins they committed in life. You see a carving of a king in his royal regalia, but you also see the subtle carving of a cross on his sword, a reminder that even the most powerful man on earth had to answer to a higher power. The king's legacy is a legacy of paradox. He was a symbol of strength, but he was also a man who was often weak and afraid. He was a man who commanded great armies, but who was ultimately defeated by a peasant rebellion and a tiny, unseen disease. His legacy is one of a man who ruled in a time of great change, a man who was a living testament to the fact that no man, no matter how powerful, is immune to the forces of history. You are a silent witness to the end of an era, a great, slow-moving tide that has washed away the old order and created a new one. Historians still argue whether the king's legacy was one of a tyrant or a unifier. You're seeing that it's a mix of both. He was a man who used violence and oppression to maintain his power, But in doing so, he also created a stronger, more centralized kingdom. His legacy is a complex one, a story that cannot be told in a single word. It is a story of a man who was a king, and a man who was also just a man, a person who was trying to survive in a world that was constantly changing. You are a ghost, a silent witness to the end of an era, and you are ready to fade away. The light in the room is soft now, and the sounds of the castle, the sounds of the market, the sounds of the fields, they're all starting to fade. You can feel your own body again, the familiar softness of your pillow, the gentle hum of your fan, the hard earth beneath your feet, the scratchy wool on your skin, the smoky air. It's all becoming a distant memory, like a dream you're waking from. You are no longer in that old, cold world, but the lessons, the feeling of it, they linger. The constant ache of a hungry stomach, the primal fear of the forest, the strange and quiet beauty of a world without electricity. It all still feels real, even though it isn't. You can let it go now. You've been a peasant, a squire, a king, and a ghost. You've lived 1,000 years in a single night. You can let the images blur, let the voices soften, and let the sounds fade to nothing. The world is safe now, and you are safe too. Just you and the quiet stillness of your room. There is no king. There is no peasant. There is only sleep.